You can imagine what happens next, right? This created a culture of what the source calls performance-based overinvestment. And the consequences? You get a market that's totally distorted by political ambition, not by what people actually need. It created this incredibly fragile economic bubble. And, according to this analysis, it fed a system of massive, widespread corruption. The whole foundation was built on sand. All right, let's talk about China's massive property crisis. This is a story that's way bigger than just some empty buildings or falling prices. The analysis we're digging into today suggests this crisis could be a genuine threat to the Chinese Communist Party itself. So, let's get into it. So, right off the bat, here's the bombshell claim from our source, Dr. Kim Sang-soon. He's basically saying the collapse of the property market isn't just some economic hiccup. Nope. He thinks it's the first spark in a chain reaction that could shake the very foundations of the ruling party. I mean, that's a huge claim. So who is Dr. Kim? Well, we're not talking about some armchair analyst here. Dr. Kim has a PhD from Peking University and has spent 3 decades in the region, including 25 years on the ground in China. So this analysis is built on years and years of direct experience. He breaks the whole thing down into 3 key factors, or, as he sees it, 3 falling dominoes. Okay, so the first domino to fall was a deliberate policy decision. But before we get to what that policy was, you have to understand just how massive the target was. I mean, just how important was the real estate sector to China's economy? Just let that number sink in. 30%. Before the pandemic, real estate was the engine powering almost a third of China's entire economy. It was the absolute cornerstone of their growth for decades. It wasn't just big, it was everything. So you've got this economic super engine, right? What in the world could be powerful enough to just slam on the brakes? Well, according to Dr. Kim's analysis, the call came from the very, very top. And the answer was Xi Jinping's zero-COVID policy. As you can see here, from 2020 all the way through 2022, this strategy of these incredibly strict, widespread lockdowns just kept intensifying. In Dr. Kim's view, this wasn't just the market cooling off. This was a forced artificial shutdown of the entire economy. And the result was, well, it was predictable and it was devastating. The economy, which was so dependent on that real estate engine, just plummeted. But here's the thing. This huge policy mistake only exposed a much deeper, older problem that was already there. And that brings us to our second domino, ambition. This is a systemic issue, a flaw that was brewing in the system long before anyone had ever heard of COVID. It's really a story about how the internal structure of the Communist Party warped the market from the very beginning. This really gets to the heart of the issue. See, in China, if you're a local party official, your career lives and dies by your performance reviews. To get that promotion up to the central government, you have to show big, flashy results. And for years, the easiest, fastest way to do that was to push for massive, often completely unplanned investment projects, especially in real estate. You can imagine what happens next, right? This created a culture of what the source calls performance-based overinvestment. And the consequences? You get a market that's totally distorted by political ambition, not by what people actually need. It created this incredibly fragile economic bubble. And, according to this analysis, it fed a system of massive, widespread corruption. The whole foundation was built on sand. And that fragile foundation leads us straight to the third and final domino, debt. This is the crucial part. This is how a crisis in one sector threatens to become a contagion, spreading through the entire financial system and ending up right on the government's doorstep. So let's follow the chain reaction. First, the big real estate developers can't pay their massive loans, so they start to default. Okay, so what? Well, the local governments were depending on those developers for a huge chunk of their revenue, so now the local governments are in a debt crisis. That crisis then spreads to the financial sector, all the banks who lent them the money in the first place. Suddenly, they have a liquidity crisis. From there, it becomes a national debt crisis for the central government. And finally, a systemic crisis for the party itself. You can see how it's all connected. So when you put all the pieces together, what do you get? Is the regime actually truly at risk? Dr. Kim's analysis would say yes, the threat is very real, precisely because the roots of the problem run so incredibly deep. So let's just recap the 3 core roots of this crisis, right? First, you have a deliberate policy mistake, zero COVID, that basically shut down the economic engine.
Second, you have a broken system of incentives that encouraged risky overinvestment and corruption for decades. And third, you get that predictable cascade of debt that links one failing company to the stability of the entire government. And all of that brings us back to Dr. Kim's really powerful conclusion. This wasn't some external shock. It wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't just a market downturn. The fallout, in his words, was self-inflicted by Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. They built the system, they made the policy calls, and now they're dealing with the consequences.
Which leaves us with one final, really critical question. If this crisis was truly self-inflicted, if it was born from the very structure and decisions of the regime itself, can it really be self-solved? Now that is something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.